So we're going to go now to a very interesting talk for a number of reasons. It's the first talk that I've had that is not in the East Bay. We're going to be hearing about a garden in San Francisco, and it's the first talk that I've had by a renter. So I was really happy to have Deborah Underwood contact me about the garden that she's been working on in San Francisco. When she started, Deborah knew, as she said, nothing about gardening. And we'll hear about how she got started, how she learned about the importance of gardening with natives, and what wildlife she's attracted to her gardens, and why a renter should bother. Deborah is the author of more than 30 picture books, including the New York Times bestsellers Here Come the Easter Cat and The Quiet Book. Her upcoming book, The Tiny Garden, was inspired by her own gardening adventures. So welcome, Deborah Underwood. Thank you for being with us today. And I know you were inspired to garden with native plants by Susan Karasoff's talk on gardening for native bees. And I want to say now that Susan will be giving a talk on gardening for native bees tomorrow at 12:30. And with that, let me turn it over to Deborah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Jessica. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm going to try to share my screen and hope that the Zoom the Zoom gods are with us today. Let me see. Is that working okay?
Looks
Yes,
great.
it is.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much. So as Kathy said, when I started gardening in May of 2020, there were a lot of things that I didn't have. I didn't have any gardening knowledge other than killing a few house plants over the years. I didn't know anything about native plants. I don't think I could have named a single one of them. I didn't have any help. I lived by myself. I didn't have any help. I didn't have a lot of money to spend. I didn't have any sort of plan for the garden. And in fact, I didn't have any interest in gardening, if I may confess that. But over the last 5 years, this space has transformed into this. And this is a view down on the ground, which now looks like this. So this all began, well, let me tell you first, here are the plants that I have now in the garden. When I started the garden, I had like maybe 1 or 2 accidental natives because I was just putting any plants in there that I could think of or that were given to me. But now this, I think, is a pretty complete list. I keep adding them. You know how that goes. So I've gone from having almost no natives to, I would say I'm probably at 85 or 90% natives now. And the non-natives that are not serving the wildlife are kind of slowly getting shoved out the door. So today I'd like to talk about my 4 gardening phases: beginning, awakening, desperation, and maturing. I'd also like to share some of the things that I did that I would do differently next time in case there are other beginning gardeners out there, and show you some of my visitors, and also talk about why I think a renter should bother. So phase 1 is the beginning. Here we are in May 2020. And what prompted the garden in the first place is that my landlord was hiring these guys to come every month and cut down all the weeds and then spray them. And I always hated when they came. It was very loud, and I honestly would rather look at weeds than at just like a barren landscape. But on this particular day, I went down and I said, "That's not Roundup you're spraying on everything, is it?" And the guy said, "Yes, that it was." So I said, "If I pull the weeds, will you stop spraying Roundup?" And he looked at me and he looked at the garden and he said, "That would be a lot of work." Well, he was not kidding about that. It was a lot of work, but I felt like I had this moral obligation to at least get them to stop spraying. So I did very gradually over the course of several days. I got the weeds cleared. You can see in this first picture that I took, I've kind of done the front part of the garden, but I still had the back to do. And then I went on to Facebook and I said to my friends, "You know what? I need to stop these weeds. Do I just get that ground cloth stuff and put it down?" And fortunately, I have some gardener Facebook friends and they said, "No, don't do that." And they told me about sheet mulching. And they said, just get some cardboard, put the mulch on top of it. That will suppress a lot of the weeds. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, maybe I'll put in a path. So I put out a call on Nextdoor and I said, "Does anybody have any pavers I can have?" And many neighbors did. So I collected the pavers and then I put down the cardboard and then I got the mulch. it will show you the depth of my inexperience that I looked at this very large space and I was like, that is a lot of space. I'm probably going to need like 10 bags of mulch. Well, it was 44 bags of mulch. And I can tell you that because I was going to the hardware store and piling bags into my Honda Civic and driving it home and then lugging it back to the garden and dumping it and then going back to the hardware store. And I did that many times. And I also collected some mulch from a neighbor who was getting rid of his. And also, some of the neighbors, when I was asking for pavers, said, hey, if you're starting a garden, I can give you a few plants. And I was like, sure, that's great. I might as well stick some plants in. So the garden's first iteration was like random plants that neighbors had given me or friends had brought over, or a few things that were already growing that I thought I'll just let them grow, or things that kind of caught my eye in a nursery. And I just thought, that's pretty, I'll go get that. So no plan, no rhyme, no reason. The one native plant that actually has done really well, here we are sort of in the mulching phase. I had arm muscles for the first time in my life, which was kind of awesome. But the one native that I accidentally got that has been a great addition has been this island snapdragon. I got it in, I think, a 2-gallon pot, and it grew really quickly to be, it's probably 5 feet across, 3 or 4 feet tall. It's in bloom almost all year, and the hummingbirds love it. So that was garden iteration 1. And then I had my awakening. And that was when I had the great good fortune to stumble across these lectures that the San Francisco Public Library sponsored during the pandemic with Susan Karasoff. Now, I will tell you, she is not only a font of information, but she has a very calming voice. So it was the perfect combination for the pandemic when we were all so rattled. So I watched this lecture and my mind was blown. I had had no idea how important native plants were. I had no idea that they supported just exponentially more wildlife. I had no idea how many caterpillars a chickadee needs to raise a clutch of egg, how many thousands it is. So that was just this huge wake-up call for me. I love animals, and I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to have a wildlife garden. So I want to make my decisions based around how many other animals like the plants will support. So I had a plan. So I started adding plants. I became very familiar with Calscape, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with too, where you can look up how many butterflies and moths and other things various plants support. So that's how I was making my decisions. The first plant I intentionally added was this flowering currant, which I'm sure is one that Susan recommended in her lecture because it blooms really early. You can see here, this is January of this year, and these flowers were already in place for probably a couple weeks before this picture was taken. So it feeds the hummingbirds when not a lot of other things are around. And even in March, I just took this a few weeks ago, there's still some flowers, they're fading. But even when I took this, I saw a bee on it getting some nourishment from it. So that's just been a really great early feeding plant. And I liked it so much that I got a chaparral currant later on. And as you can see, this was January 1st, and it had started blooming in December. So I'm really trying to get year-round coverage. So there's always something for the hummingbirds and other animals to eat. The currant did so well that I got a golden currant. This is turning out to be a lot bigger than I expected, which is sort of a theme for me in the garden. It's very hard when you're a new gardener to look at this little tiny pot and believe the plant is going to get enormous. And I keep kind of ignoring this stuff on the label and going, I can't get that big, but this is getting really big now. It's beautiful, but it's a lot bigger than I was expecting. I got some ceanothus. This one is so beautiful in particular, and it was just swarming with bees a couple weeks ago, and I think it's still blooming a bit. I got a toyon, which I was super excited about. It stayed very small for the first year or two, but it's finally starting to take off. I'm hoping I might get berries sometime soon in the next couple of years. And I got an elderberry, and this was just a great plant to add because it has grown so quickly. It would be a great thing if you're looking to block a neighbor's yard, and the birds love it. It gives them the cover and the height, and of course the berries that they need. And there are always birds sitting in that plant, so that was a great addition. And I also got an ocean spray. I think Susan mentioned this in the lecture of hers that I saw too. Mine is just staying really small right now. I've had it in the ground for several years, but I'm hoping this might be the year that it starts to get big and block more of the neighbor's garden. So that brings me to the desperation phase. I had really wanted a silver bush lupin, and I was having a hard time finding one, but I found one up at a nursery in Marin, and I was so excited, and I brought it home and I stuck it in the ground. And then I went to check on it the next day, and I looked at it and I went, I thought there was a lot bigger yesterday. And then I went out the next day and it was completely gone. And that was how I was introduced to the villain, the adorable villain of the story, Hubert, my gopher acquaintance. Here you can see him sort of popping up, looking to see what's on the menu in the garden. Now, I love animals. I knew I wasn't going to try to kill Hubert. I hope nobody is using rat poison or any kind of poisons on rodents because, of course, not only does it kill the rodents, which is horrible for the rodents, but it also ends up poisoning the hawks and the owls. And so you end up with even more rodents. So it's a terrible thing to do. I didn't want to trap him either, just because I love animals and I didn't like the thought of him sitting in a little cold cage for 12 hours being stressed out. And where would I put him anyway, right? So I thought I will deter Hubert. So I tried many things. I tried one of those beepy things you put in the ground that makes an annoying beep every 15 seconds or so. I actually saw him come up about 4 inches away from this device. I think he thought it was a dance party or something. So that clearly did not work. I got some castor oil granules that you're supposed to pour down the holes. That didn't work. And I got some supposedly gopher-proof plants. Here is where I kind of veered off the native plant thing because I was so desperate to just get anything in the garden that would stay there. So I even got some marigolds because they're supposed to be very distasteful to gophers. And he ate all of the marigolds. He has very eclectic tastes, so good for him, but kind of bad for my garden. So at that point, I realized I needed a new plan. And that plan was coexist. So I made him a mailbox. Did I mention I write children's books? I do. I made him a little mailbox. I started just for my own benefit to make memorial stones for each of the plants that he was eating because I felt good to at least commemorate them and have them still in the garden in some form. And then I decided what I would have to do is find the plants that my particular gopher didn't like and I made a list of those and just use gopher baskets for the other plants, especially the expensive ones. I don't like doing that because I don't really like the look of gopher baskets, and I'm never sure if I'm using the right size or not, but I figure that was the best I could do. So in my garden, he did not like the currants. He did not touch the ceanothus. He didn't touch the snapdragon. I think he didn't like the monkey flowers or the coffee berries either. And salvias, he never touched any of those, native or non-native. So I thought, I will just double up on those. So I got a Catalina currant, which is actually a lovely, I'm not sure if it's officially a ground cover, but it's certainly spreading out in my garden. The chaparral currant that I added. I got some more ceanothus. I got this pretty white snow flurry one and some ground cover ones as well, like this popcorn ceanothus and a hearse ceanothus. And then I just went sage crazy. I got white sage. This is getting huge. Black sage, this too is getting huge. Hummingbird sage, which is so pretty and has just such a cool texture, kind of a sticky, interesting texture and beautiful color and very, very fragrant. I got a Mrs. Beard creeping sage, which is stretching out under the existing plum tree in the back. And, and here points out the fact that I was terrible at keeping records. I got a Sonoma sage and I got a Bee's Bliss sage, and one of them died. And I can't remember which one this is. One of you will probably know, but it is doing well too, and it's spreading out all over the place, and gophers don't seem to like it. So that brings me to the maturing phase, which is where I am now. So basically what I'm doing is slowly replacing the non-natives that are not doing any work and keeping an eye on the garden and seeing what seems to be needed. For example, my neighbor had this tree. It was this beautiful tree, and then last summer it died, and I do not know what happened. I think it was an extra dry summer. but it looks like that now, which is such a shame. I'm glad that he is not taking it down because the birds are still definitely using it. But I looked at that and I was like, we need more height in the garden. So what do you get height from? You get it from elderberries. So I went and I got not one, not two, not no, but three more elderberries. So now I have four. If you were looking at my garden wondering if I have room for those, I think the answer is probably no, but they're in there anyway, and we will see what happens. I've got a Malvarosa that's actually starting to get big too. I'm just really looking for the height and the cover that the birds need. Um, I've kind of become a sucker for plants that I hadn't seen before or that seem rare or that I've heard of but I couldn't find before. So I just put in this beautiful iris. Recently, I found these Conejo buckwheats. I'd never heard of those, so I stuck those in. Santa Lucia bush mallow, never heard of that. Native, put it in. And I got a serviceberry, and I will never forget getting the serviceberry because it needs some sun. And I remember standing in the plant place going, I've never seen a serviceberry before. And then saying, I don't have any room for anything in the sunny side of the garden. You should not get the serviceberry. And the other part of my brain going, but it's a serviceberry. The other part going, no, you really don't have room for that. There's no sunny space. It gets big, but it's a serviceberry. And of course, I got the serviceberry. So again, we will see what happens with that. It did kind of entice me to make this little sign. Please do not sell me any plants which require sun. Please sell me only small plants which require shade. So we will see how that works next time I go to a garden store. I put in a lemon tree early on because I don't know, I didn't know what I was doing and it was a prima donna and fussy and never did well. So I took it out and now I put this mountain mahogany in there. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops over time. And I don't, it's a little hard to see here, but there's a black pot in the back with this ridiculously tall ceanothus that I just put in a few weeks ago. One of the plants the neighbor gave me initially was this succulent, I think an aeonium that just got enormous and obviously was not doing anything for the wildlife. So I pulled it out and I got this ridiculously tall ceanothus that I walked home from the botanical garden plant shop on a dolly. So I kind of felt like I was walking through the streets of San Francisco with a jousting lance, but I got in the ground and it is gorgeous now. It's blooming this beautiful shade of purple. I got my first manzanita not too long ago, my first upright manzanita. I was so happy when it had the little flowers, even at this tiny size that it is now. I got a salmonberry to go with my huckleberry and thimbleberry and lemonade berry and some other kind of berries. And it seems to be growing about an inch a day. I might be exaggerating that a little bit, but it seems to be settling in really well in a nice shady area. And I finally got a coastal bush lupin, which I hope will fill out along the very back side of the garden. So, oh, and I had a columbine. I planted a columbine in the fall and it totally, completely disappeared. And I couldn't even remember where I planted it. And in fact, I covered it up with mulch when I mulched last month. And then I went down to the garden a few days ago and I saw these little things poking up and it's alive. So I have kind of a zombie columbine. I'm excited about that. So some of the things that I wish that I would have done for you other complete newbie gardeners, I wish I would have kept records of what I planted and when I planted them. I kept having this dream of having this beautifully organized garden notebook, but of course, the more you put in the garden, the less chance there is of that happening because you've kind of lost track of everything. So what I am doing now, at least, is just taking a photo of the plant label when I put it in the ground, because at least then I will know what it is and about when I put it in. I wish I would have paid more attention to how sunlight moves through the garden. I was very surprised that first year when the sun got lower and all of a sudden half of my garden was plunged into shade. I had not really thought that far ahead. I hadn't anticipated that. And that was good information to have for future purchases. As I mentioned, I'm not good at estimating how big a little teeny plant is going to get. So I have plants that are crammed too close together. And it's very hard to get to some of the ones in the back because I did not leave appropriate path space. It's a little precarious even now getting to them. And I can imagine in 5 years, it's going to be worse. So that would have, it would have been good to give that some thought. I wish I would have grouped higher water plants together. I have like this bird bath that I clean out at least every week. I have this area where I clean out the bird feeders. Those get a ton of water when I'm standing there doing the cleaning. Those would have been a really great place to put higher water plants instead of sprinkled through the garden. So I have to kind of remember which ones they are. I wish I would have understood that watering needs to be adjusted in extremely dry years. Since I didn't have the context, I didn't know that last summer was really dry. And I ended up killing a couple of my plants, which kind of broke my heart. And I think that might have been the cause of my neighbor's tree dying too. So just keeping track of that, or maybe asking gardener friends, is this an extra dry year? That might help you keep more plants alive. I wish I would have known that Instacart delivers mulch. I was so thrilled a couple of years ago when I looked on the Lowe's hardware thing on Instacart and realized I could order mulch and have some nice guy haul it from the store. The thing is, since I live in an apartment, I can't do one of those chip drop things where they just put a mountain of chips in front of your home, because that would block my neighbors' garages. So I have to get mulch in bags. And so this year I needed 10 bags, and a nice guy came and I tipped him very, very well to carry him into the back for me. And that will make my physical therapist very happy. And also, I wish I had realized that gophers sometimes return, because Hubert went away about a year ago. I like to think that maybe he died peacefully and very full in his burrow. More likely, maybe he got eaten by one of my resident hawks. And I got cocky. I started putting things that are very tempting to gophers and planting them without gopher baskets. And I was standing in the back a few weeks ago with a friend, and we were looking at the garden, and I saw a piece of mulch move. And I was like, did you see that? And it moved again. And then this adorable little head popped up. And we had a discussion with a gopher, and we said maybe he would like to go eat weeds in the neighbor's yard, or maybe he would like to go to the park where they have a nice selection of plants. And he seemed to listen to us. He kind of tilted his head thoughtfully and then ducked back underground. I haven't lost any plants. Maybe he listened, but it probably would have been prudent for me to put my new poppies in gopher baskets. So this is my favorite part. I love all of the animals that are being attracted to the yard. Of course, the bees make me super happy, especially when it's January and there probably isn't a ton of other stuff for them to eat. I can't remember which currant it is. It might be the chaparral currant. Get Eurasian collared doves from time to time. I have a whole colony of mourning doves. Sometimes I'll go out, there'll be like 12 of them sitting back there. Dark-eyed juncos. I think only gardeners will understand how excited I am now when I dig into the soil and it's just full of worms. I am sure that is not the case when they were spraying right and left, but now every time I go to put a plant in the ground, there will be a lot of worms that I'm digging up too. So I'm apologizing to the worms a lot, but also very happy that the soil is returning to health. Hummingbirds, of course. I have a resident hummingbird who sits up in various things. I saw him actually in the elderberry for the first time yesterday, so that makes me happy. I have golden crown and white crown sparrows are frequent visitors. Of course, our house finches. There was this lovely little white-throated sparrow that took up residence, I think it was last year, and hung out in the garden for several days. That was awesome. Of course, we have other visitors too. This is Buddy the raccoon. I'm very happy that I now have a lot of hummingbird food in the form of flowers, because when I actually had a feeder, this is what would happen to it. He would tromp up to my third floor fire escape and drink his fill. And I think my favorite things are the raptors. Before I started gardening, I had no idea how many raptors are in the city. I live a little bit south of Golden Gate Park, but red-tailed hawks, there's this corner of the building they like to hunt from. Red-shouldered hawks hang out there too. I was in the garden a few days ago and a Cooper's hawk just kind of plunked down. It's a juvenile. I think he was a little clueless and didn't know he should be concerned about me. So he just kind of sat there asking me where all the birds had been that were there a few minutes ago. And I just stood there for 10 minutes taking pictures of him. So that was really a treat. This is Minerva, a red-tailed hawk, who she spent several hours a day on my fire escape for a period of probably 3 or 4 weeks a couple of years ago, and it was just such a treat. She was obviously hunting in the garden, and it was so great to be able to just be 6 feet away from this beautiful hawk. Here she is. She actually turned around and saw my cat sitting on a chair, and I thought she was maybe in attack mode, but my raptor friends say that Minerva was actually afraid of Bella and was trying to make herself look as big as possible. So that was fun. Um, so I want to end just talking about why a renter should bother doing this. Here's a picture out my window. You can see my garden on the right. To the left, we have a yard with some oleanders and a big mulch circle with weed cloth and weeds, and I think a lemon tree that's been there forever. In the yard behind that, another bush of some sort, the dead tree, and just nothing but weeds. And then on the other side, and this just kills me, this big thing of mulch. And I watched them a few years ago very laboriously put weed cloth under all of that. And clearly it doesn't work. They've already had to come and cut down the weeds, and the weeds are growing through anyway. And I had said, you know what, would you consider just maybe putting in a few native shrubs? And they just didn't want to do it, unfortunately. So you can see how much space is just being wasted by mulch and weeds when it could really be very productive wildlife habitat. So I'm going to stop sharing here. So I really wish that more renters would do this. I understand that there are a lot of obstacles, like a lot of people don't know how important native plants are. A lot of people, even if they want to garden, don't have the tools to get started. And I think organizations like this are doing a great job of introducing the concept of native gardening to other people. There's the additional issue of landlord permissions. I will tell you, I did not get permission from my landlord. I think everybody has to make their own decisions, but I have a good relationship with him. He does not live on the property. And I figured he was paying these guys to come kill everything. So if I was taking care of the garden, then he wouldn't have to pay them. I have to say, I did not take into account the water cost. I've always been a renter, so I don't know how much his water bill went up, but I am trying to put in drought tolerant things. So hopefully now that the garden's established, it will be even less than it was in those first years. So I mean, I think my official advice would be you should get permission, but I just thought, I know my landlord, we have a good relationship. I think this is going to be fine. But I think the biggest obstacle is the one that kept me from doing anything for so many years. And that is this question of why a renter should even bother. Why should you spend your time and your energy and your money to improve somebody else's property? And I was thinking about this as I sat in the garden a few months ago. Um, I hope the garden will be there in 10 years. I really do. And there's no guarantee that it will be. But then I realized even if I owned a home, there would not be a guarantee of that, right? I think we've all seen with all the fires and floods and all sorts of small and large disasters, tomorrow isn't promised. It's not promised to any of the places we love, and it's not promised to us either. So as I sat in the garden watching this white-crowned sparrow sit in an elderberry bush that hadn't been there 4 years ago, I just thought, regardless of what happens in the future, what I have done is I have made a place that is good for the environment, it's good for the birds, it's good for the bees, and it's good for a lot of other critters right now. And that's really all we can do. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm really grateful that I could be here to share my garden with you. Thank you.
Deborah, thank you so much for that presentation. It was fantastic.